He thought stealing my home was his masterstroke. He secretly transferred our $1 million house into his mother's name and smirked like I would never find out. But the day I discovered his forgery, I made one calculated financial move that stripped them of everything and left them completely homeless overnight. My name is Natalie. I am 34 years old, and I work as a corporate restructuring consultant. It was the 4th of July, and the heavy summer heat hung over the backyard of my Chicago suburb home. I was standing by the custom stone grill, flipping burgers and listening to the distant pop of fireworks. The yard was packed with family and neighbors holding cold drinks. That was when my mother-in-law Beatrice marched straight through the crowd. She bypassed the appetizer table, walked right up to my grilling station, and slammed a heavy leather-bound folder onto the marble counter. The loud smack echoed over the music, making several guests turn their heads. "You have exactly 30 days," Natalie Beatrice declared. Her voice was sharp and loud enough to ensure the surrounding guests could hear every word. "I suggest you start packing your cheap bags tonight. This house belongs to me now." I slowly set down my metal tongs. The cheerful chatter abruptly died, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Neighbors awkwardly lowered their drinks. I looked at the folder. The top page was partially visible. It was a quitclaim deed proudly bearing a signature that looked suspiciously like my own, legally transferring the entire property to Beatrice. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with entitled in-laws who thought they could walk all over you. Trust me, you will want to hear how I handled this. To understand how we got to this freezing point in the middle of a warm summer barbecue, you need to understand the dynamics of this family. I bought this beautiful 5-bedroom property with my own money. As a consultant, I spend 60 hours a week analyzing spreadsheets, restructuring failing businesses, and making difficult financial decisions. I paid the massive down payment, and I selected every piece of custom furniture in the living room. But to Beatrice, I was never good enough for her son. She viewed me as a cold workaholic who cared more about profit margins than providing her with grandchildren. Beatrice valued appearances above all else. She wore clothes she could barely afford and loved hosting lavish parties to impress her country club friends. When she realized I earned significantly more money than her precious son, her subtle jabs turned into outright hostility. She resented my financial independence. She felt it emasculated him. And clearly she had finally convinced him to do something stupid about it. I stood in the quiet backyard studying her smug face. Crossing her arms over her silk blouse, she vibrated with triumph. She really thought she had legally outmaneuvered a woman whose literal job is finding legal loopholes in corporate contracts. "Is that so, Beatrice?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady and dangerously calm. "That is absolutely right," she sneered, stepping closer so I could smell her overpowering floral perfume. My son finally woke up and realized he needs to protect his assets from a woman who refuses to build a real family. "The papers are signed and filed. You are a guest here now, and your invitation has just been permanently revoked. Oh, and one more thing," she added, a nasty little smile forming on her thin lips. "When you pack your things, do not even think about taking that custom double-door refrigerator. That stays. It belongs to the property now." I looked past her shoulder. Our neighbors were staring in absolute shock. Some looked horrified, others embarrassed, but no one dared to intervene. They were waiting for me to scream, cry, or fall apart right there on the patio. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline pump through my veins. The sheer audacity of this woman demanding my appliances while standing on the patio I paid for was almost comical. She had no idea about the financial landmine she had just stepped on. I did not raise my voice or give her the emotional breakdown she was craving. Instead, I calmly picked up a clean cloth towel and wiped the barbecue sauce off my hands. I looked her dead in the eyes and smiled. It was a cold, practiced smile that I usually reserve for destroying hostile corporate takeovers. "If you say so, Beatrice," I replied softly, ensuring the crowd heard me. "I hope your credit score is ready for the heat." Before Beatrice could even register my warning, the sliding glass door of our living room slid open. Out stepped my soon-to-be ex-husband, Jason. He was wearing a designer linen shirt I had bought him for his birthday, Unbuttoned just enough at the collar to show off a gold chain he genuinely thought made him look like a powerful executive. But it was not his outfit that made the remaining guests gasp and whisper. It was the woman clinging tightly to his arm. She looked barely out of college. She wore a tight floral sundress that prominently displayed her heavily pregnant belly. She had the kind of naive, wide-eyed expression that Jason always gravitated towards someone who would look at his mid-level regional sales director job and think he was a billionaire genius. Jason walked her right up to the grill, placing a highly exaggerated protective hand over her stomach. He looked down at me, his chest puffed out with the unearned arrogance of a man who believes he has just pulled off the crime of the century. "There is no need to make threats, Natalie," Jason said, his voice dripping with smug condescension. "My mother is absolutely right. I filed the divorce papers this morning, and my lawyer has already sent a copy to your office downtown. It is over. I am finally taking control of my life again." I crossed my arms, resting my weight on one leg, letting the smoke from the grill drift between us. "You brought your pregnant mistress to a family barbecue on a national holiday. Classy move, Jason. Do not speak to her like that," he snapped, stepping slightly in front of the young woman to play the protective hero. "Her name is Amber, and she is giving me the one thing you never could. A real family." He looked around at the crowd, raising his voice as if he were giving a keynote speech at a corporate retreat. He wanted an audience for this humiliation. He needed everyone to know that he was the victim of a cold, heartless career woman rather than a cheating husband. "Everyone here knows how hard I tried to make this marriage work," Jason announced, sweeping his free hand through the air to gesture at the audience. "But you are never home. You spend 60 hours a week flying across the country, saving dying companies while letting your own marriage rot. You care more about your spreadsheets and your promotions than you ever cared about being a wife. And let us be completely honest, Natalie. We spent 3 years trying to have a baby, and you failed. Amber is giving me a son. A man needs a legacy. He needs a woman who actually wants to be a mother, not a corporate robot in a pantsuit." A few of his friends from the local golf club nodded in quiet agreement, which only fueled his massive, fragile ego. He turned his attention back to me, pointing a freshly manicured finger right at my face. "That is exactly why I took action," he continued, a greedy grin spreading across his face. "I knew that once the divorce was filed, you would try to use your expensive downtown lawyers to bleed me dry. You would try to take this beautiful house, the house I live in, the house my new son deserves to grow up in. So I protected my assets. I transferred the deed entirely to my mother. It is an ironclad legal maneuver. You cannot touch it. You cannot force a sale, and you certainly cannot kick me out. My son is going to have a massive backyard to play in, and my mother will have the absolute financial security she deserves in her retirement." Amber leaned her head on his shoulder, looking at me with a sickening mixture of fake pity and blatant triumph. "I felt so bad for you at first," she chimed in, her voice high-pitched and breathy. "But Jason told me how controlling and difficult you are. He deserves to be happy and to be the man of his own house." I just stared at her. I did not feel any anger toward this young woman. I only felt a fleeting sense of pity, because she had absolutely no idea what kind of catastrophic financial ruin she was attaching herself to. Jason laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed across the patio. "Do not look so shocked, Natalie. You always thought you were the smartest person in the room just because you make a little more money than I do. But I outsmarted you. I secured my family's future. It is time for you to face reality. You do not own anything here anymore." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I and the people immediately around us could hear his final insult. "You remember what it was like before you met me, right? Drowning in those massive student loans, living in that cramped, disgusting apartment, struggling to keep your head above water. Well, it is time to go back to that life. Pack up whatever cheap clothes you brought into this marriage and get out. Go find a tiny studio apartment. You are done here." I did not flinch. I did not scream or cry. I looked at the man I had supported for the last 5 years, a man whose career I had guided, whose credit card debts I had quietly paid off, and whose luxurious lifestyle I had entirely funded. He truly believed he had secured a $1 million property for free simply by forging a signature on a piece of paper. He thought his little amateur stunt with the quitclaim deed had outsmarted a woman whose entire career revolved around corporate restructuring, debt management, and contract law. He was so incredibly blind to the trap he had just locked himself inside. Just as Jason finished his pathetic speech, his younger sister Olivia pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She held a half-empty glass of white wine and wore a smug, self-satisfied grin. Olivia was 30 years old and had spent her entire adult life financially dependent on either her mother or her brother. Naturally, she saw my expulsion as a massive victory for their twisted family dynamic. "You really brought this on yourself, Natalie," Olivia chimed in, taking a dramatic sip of her wine. "You have absolutely no family values. You never wanted to be a real part of this family anyway. All you care about is your bank account and your fancy corporate job." Jason deserves a woman who actually respects him and understands traditional family roles. "You should be grateful my mother is even giving you 30 days to pack your things." She looked around the patio, expecting the neighborhood guests to nod along with her ridiculous statement. Instead, a tall, well-built man stepped forward from the back of the crowd, his face twisted in absolute disgust. It was Jamal, Olivia's husband. Jamal was a 32-year-old software engineer, a brilliant black man who had always been the only grounded, logical person in that entire chaotic family. Over the years, Jamal and I had shared many exhausted looks across crowded Thanksgiving dinner tables. He knew exactly how toxic his in-laws were, and clearly he had finally reached his breaking point. "Are you out of your mind?" Olivia Jamal's deep voice cut through the heavy summer air, silencing her instantly. He walked over and stood directly between me and Jason, glaring at his brother-in-law. "What is wrong with you people, Jason? You cannot just forge your wife's signature on a legal document and hand the house over to your mother. That is a felony." Jason puffed out his chest, stepping forward to try and intimidate Jamal, but Jamal did not budge an inch. "Mind your own business, Jamal." Jason spat his face, turning red. "This is a private family matter." "It is my business when I am watching my wife and her family commit a crime in broad daylight." Jamal fired back, his voice rising with righteous anger. He pointed a firm finger at the sprawling brick house behind us. "Natalie paid the massive down payment on this house. Natalie pays the mortgage every single month. She paid off your ridiculous credit card debt, Jason, and now you bring your pregnant mistress to a holiday barbecue and try to throw your wife out onto the street. You are a coward." The crowd murmured in agreement. Jamal had voiced what everyone else was too terrified to say out loud. Olivia's face flushed with fury. She grabbed Jamal's arm, her voice reaching a shrill, hysterical pitch that echoed across the yard. "Shut your mouth right now, Jamal. You are supposed to be on our side. You are my husband and you need to support your real family, not this cold corporate ice queen." Jamal looked at the hand clutching his arm, then looked up at his wife as if he were seeing her clearly for the very first time. The disgust in his eyes was unmistakable. "If this is how your real family treats the people who support them, I want absolutely nothing to do with it," he said coldly, forcefully pulling his arm away from her grasp. Olivia gasped, completely scandalized, while Beatrice clutched her pearl necklace in exaggerated shock. Jason tried to jump back into the argument to defend his sister, but I raised my hand, signaling Jamal to stop. I did not need a knight in shining armor today. I already had a loaded gun, financially speaking, and I was just waiting for the exact right moment to pull the trigger. "Jamal, it is okay," I said quietly. "Let them have their moment." I stepped forward, completely ignoring Jason, Olivia, and the pregnant mistress standing awkwardly to the side. I walked straight up to Beatrice, who instinctively took a half step back, suddenly intimidated by my silence. I looked down at the leather-bound folder resting on the marble counter. I studied the quitclaim deed, my eyes lingering on the poorly forged signature that Jason had scribbled at the bottom of the page. It was a sloppy, desperate attempt at theft. I looked back up at Beatrice. I did not scream. I did not curse. I simply gave her a chilling, calculated smile that made the color completely drain from her face. "Take good care of the property, Beatrice," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and perfectly even. Maintenance on a house this size is incredibly expensive, especially when things start breaking down. Without waiting for her to respond, I turned around, picked up my designer purse from the patio chair, and walked down the stone pathway toward the front gate. I did not shed a single tear. I did not look back at the chaos I was leaving behind. Let them enjoy their stolen house and their fake victory. They had absolutely no idea that by taking my name off that deed, they had just initiated their own total financial destruction. Exactly 1 month had passed since the 4th of July barbecue. The relentless summer heat continued to beat down on the Chicago suburbs, and inside my former home, the delusion had reached absolute peak levels. Jason and Amber had fully moved in, completely taking over the space I had meticulously designed. To them, my silence over the past 4 weeks meant absolute surrender. They genuinely believed I was hiding in some tiny rundown studio apartment, crying over my massive loss. They thought they had won the war without a single casualty. Beatrice had practically moved in as well. Although she technically still rented her own small condo across town, she spent every waking moment treating my $1 million property as her personal kingdom. She immediately appointed herself the unofficial queen of the neighborhood. One sunny Sunday morning, she decided to host a lavish brunch for the Homeowners Association board members to cement her new elevated social status. She arranged catered mimosas, expensive imported cheeses, and delicate artisanal pastries, spreading them out across the custom granite kitchen island I had paid for with my own hard-earned bonuses. Beatrice paraded her guests through the spacious living room, gesturing grandly at the high ceilings and the custom hardwood floors as if she had laid them herself. "My Jason is an absolute real estate genius," Beatrice boasted loudly to the HOA president, a highly judgmental woman named Brenda. "He knew exactly when to strike. He protected this beautiful home from that cold, calculating woman he used to be married to. He transferred the deed right into my name. It was a brilliant, ironclad legal maneuver. Now my future grandson will grow up with the luxury and space he truly deserves." Jason ate up the praise like a starving man. He stood by the expensive double-door refrigerator, the very same one Beatrice had strictly forbidden me from taking, holding a crystal champagne flute. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. Over the past month, he had completely drained what was left of his personal savings account to fund their new extravagant lifestyle. He had recently bought Amber a brand new electric SUV, parking it proudly in the driveway for all the neighbors to see. Inside the house, they ripped out the quiet home office where I used to work, tossing my custom desk out onto the curb. They replaced it with absurdly expensive baby furniture, hand-painted wall murals, and imported silk curtains. "It is all about taking charge and being the man of the house," Jason told a group of impressed neighbors out on the patio. Natalie always thought she controlled the finances just because she had a fancy corporate title and worked downtown. But when you understand the law, you can easily outmaneuver people like her. "I secured a massive $1 million asset for my family without paying a single dime in lawyer fees." She just packed her bags and ran away. She knew she was beaten. She knew she could not fight a legally binding deed transfer. The sheer irony of his confident statement was staggering. He was openly bragging about a forged document that was at that very moment sitting safely inside a locked file cabinet at my high-powered corporate attorney's office. But in their isolated little bubble, they felt entirely invincible. Amber chimed into the conversation, rubbing her pregnant belly while sipping a non-alcoholic cocktail. "We are going to put a massive heated hot tub right there in the corner of the yard," she announced, pointing a brightly manicured finger toward my favorite flower beds. "Jason says we have so much equity in this house, it is basically free money just waiting to be used." They were spending money like lottery winners who had zero concept of tomorrow. Jason bought a completely unnecessary top-of-the-line ride on lawnmower for a yard that was already maintained by a professional landscaping service. Beatrice hired a private chef to cook elegant dinners for them twice a week, charging it all to a high-interest credit card she assumed Jason would easily pay off with his newly found wealth. They threw weekly evening parties, leaving the lights blazing all night and running the central air conditioning at freezing temperatures with the patio doors left wide open. They had absolutely no concept of the monthly carrying costs of a property that size. They did not understand property taxes, specialized insurance premiums, or the massive utility bills that were quietly accumulating in the background. They were living in a temporary fantasy world built entirely on a stolen piece of paper. Every time they laughed at my expense, every time they raised a glass to toast their brilliant victory, they were simply dancing on the deck of a sinking ship. They thought I was gone, erased from their perfect new lives. But I was not gone. I was sitting comfortably in my luxury downtown penthouse, watching the calendar, letting them dig a financial hole so deep they would never ever be able to climb out. Up in my penthouse overlooking the sparkling Chicago skyline, the silence was absolutely beautiful. The only interruption to my peaceful new reality was the relentless vibrating of my phone against the glass coffee table. Despite their grand declarations of victory and their supposed desire to completely erase me from their lives, Jason and Beatrice simply could not leave me alone. Their greed was a bottomless pit, and their financial ignorance was about to become their greatest downfall. The petty harassment started in the second week of August. Jason sent me a rapid-fire series of text messages on a Tuesday morning. He demanded that I pay the final electricity and water bills for the house. He actually took photos of the utility statements and sent them to me with long, arrogant paragraphs. He explained that since the billing cycle included days when my name was still technically on the deed, it was my legal responsibility to clear the balance. The total came to a mere $400. This was a man who believed he had just legally stolen a $1 million property, yet he was desperately nickel and diming me over a basic electric bill. I read the messages while sipping my morning espresso, watching the morning traffic far below my balcony. I did not type a single letter in response. I simply swiped the notification away. When Jason did not get the angry, emotional reaction he was desperately fishing for, his mother decided to join the attack. Beatrice started leaving me lengthy, unhinged voicemails. Her tone was always a sickening mix of fake sweetness and vicious threats. In one message, she claimed she had found microscopic scratches on the expensive Brazilian cherry hardwood floors in the dining room. She declared that I had clearly caused the damage while dragging my luggage to the front door on the day she kicked me out. She threatened to hire an expensive luxury contractor to refinish the entire first floor. She promised to drag me into small claims court to force me to cover the $2,000 invoice. I saved her voicemail to a secure digital audio folder right next to the security footage of Jason bringing his pregnant mistress to my patio. Let her threaten small claims court. She had absolutely no idea that a much larger, far more devastating court date was already inevitable. The absolute climax of their petty harassment came a few days later when the county issued the second installment of the annual property taxes. Property taxes in Illinois are notoriously high, and the bill for that massive suburban house was staggering. Jason sent me a highly formal email this time, trying his hardest to sound like a sophisticated corporate lawyer. He formally demanded that I pay the massive property tax installment because I had lived in the house for the first half of the year. I actually laughed out loud in my empty apartment. He wanted all the social and financial benefits of owning a massive estate without taking on a single ounce of the actual financial responsibility. He truly believed he could legally transfer the deed to his mother, claim full ownership, live there for free with his new mistress, and still force his ex-wife to pay the government taxes. It was a stunning display of pure financial illiteracy. I sat at my sleek dining table, surrounded by a mountain of neatly organized financial documents. I did not reply to his ridiculous email. I did not block their phone numbers either because every text message and every voicemail was just more concrete evidence of their extreme arrogance. Instead, I focused all my attention on the paperwork spread out in front of me. I was meticulously organizing the original closing documents for the house. Right in the center of the table was the original promissory note and the deed of trust. It clearly listed the legal lender as Vanguard Holdings, LLC. It clearly outlined the massive $600,000 commercial lien attached to the property. And right there on page 12, highlighted in bright yellow ink, was the due on sale clause. It explicitly stated that any transfer of the property title without the prior written consent of the lender would immediately trigger a massive default, requiring the entire loan balance to be paid in full within 30 days. Jason had forged my signature to transfer the title to his mother. He thought he was stealing my equity. In reality, he had just triggered the default clause of a massive commercial real estate loan. I gathered the heavy stack of papers, slipping them perfectly into a thick manila envelope. My trap was fully set. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. With all the money they were wasting on new baby furniture, expensive cars, and lavish neighborhood parties, Jason was going to run out of cash very soon. He was going to look at that massive house, assume he had hundreds of thousands of dollars in free equity, and try to take out a new loan. I placed the envelope in my leather briefcase and smiled. All I had to do was wait for him to confidently walk into a bank. 2 days after I organized my legal paperwork, I received a text message from Jamal asking to meet in person. I chose a quiet, high-end espresso bar in the heart of the downtown financial district, far away from the suburban bubble where my former in-laws were currently parading around. I sat in a secluded leather booth near the back, nursing a black coffee and watching the busy afternoon foot traffic through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The contrast between my calm, structured environment and the absolute circus happening at my old house was incredibly satisfying. 10 minutes later, Jamal walked through the glass doors. He looked completely exhausted. The bright, energetic software developer I had known for years looked like he had aged 5 years in a single month. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of dealing with his wife and her toxic family. He spotted me, gave a tired nod, and slid into the booth across from me. He did not even bother ordering a drink. He just let out a long, heavy sigh and rubbed his temples. "I am so sorry," Natalie, Jamal said, his deep voice thick with genuine regret. "I am sorry for everything they are doing. I am sorry I did not punch Jason in the face right there on the patio." "You did exactly what you needed to do, Jamal," I replied softly. "You spoke the truth when everyone else was too cowardly to say a word. You have nothing to apologize for." Jamal shook his head, reaching into the pocket of his dark winter coat. He pulled out a small silver USB flash drive and slid it across the smooth wooden table toward me. It stopped right next to my coffee cup. "I intercepted this yesterday," he explained, keeping his voice low. Jason left his laptop wide open on the kitchen counter during one of Beatrice's ridiculous Sunday brunches. He was logged into his primary banking portal. "I know I probably crossed a legal line, but after seeing what he did to you with that forged deed, I did not care. I downloaded everything. I looked at the silver drive, my interest instantly piqued. What exactly am I looking at here?" Jamal leaned forward, his expression hardening with disgust. "He drained your joint savings account, Natalie. The one you two set up for emergency home repairs. He forged your digital authorization, transferred $50,000 into his personal checking account, and used it to buy that brand new electric SUV for Amber. He literally stole your money to buy a car for his mistress, and now he is parading it around the neighborhood like he is some kind of massive success." A cold wave of clarity washed over me. I had assumed Jason was maxing out his credit cards to fund his new lifestyle, but knowing he had actively drained our joint reserves just added another layer of criminal liability to his already sinking ship. I picked up the flash drive and slipped it securely into my designer purse. This was not just a piece of evidence. This was the final nail in his coffin. "Thank you, Jamal," I said sincerely. "This is exactly what my legal team needs to establish a clear pattern of financial fraud." Jamal sat back against the leather seat, running a hand over his face. "I cannot take it anymore, Natalie. I really cannot. Olivia is exactly like her mother, and I have been blind to it for years. She defends Jason constantly. She calls him a brilliant provider while calling you a bitter failure. The subtle racism, the intense entitlement, the absolute delusion they all live in. It is suffocating. I tried to talk sense into my wife, but she just screamed at me to support her real family. I am completely done." I looked at him, feeling a deep wave of sympathy. Jamal was a good man who had been trapped in the same nightmare I had just escaped. He deserved better, and he deserved to be protected from the massive blast radius that was about to obliterate his in-laws. I leaned across the table, locking eyes with him. My tone shifted from conversational to strictly business. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Jamal. You need to go to your bank today, not tomorrow. Today. He frowned, looking slightly confused. What do you mean, separate your bank accounts from Olivia immediately? I instructed, my voice firm and uncompromising. Move your paycheck direct deposits, lock down your tech stock options, and freeze any joint credit cards you share with her. Put a hard wall between your money and her name. Jamal stared at me, realizing the gravity of my words. Why, what are you going to do? I am not going to do anything. I smiled coldly. Jason already did it to himself. But I promise you this. The financial bomb drops on them next week. When it happens, Beatrice and Jason are going to lose everything, and they are going to come begging Olivia for money. If your name is attached to her accounts, they will drag you down with them. Protect yourself right now and get out before the house collapses. Jamal walked out of the coffee shop with intense clarity. He marched directly to his bank. Sitting across from a wealth advisor, Jamal systematically severed every financial tie to Olivia. He moved his stock options into a private trust, rerouted his direct deposits, and froze the high-limit credit cards Olivia freely swiped for years. He watched the joint balances drop to zero, feeling the suffocating weight of his marriage lift. He had funded her lavish lifestyle for far too long, buying her peace while she allowed her family to tear him down. By the time Jamal unlocked the door to their downtown loft, the sun was setting. Olivia lounged on the velvet sofa, wine in one hand, smartphone in the other. She was loudly gossiping with Beatrice on speakerphone, complaining about finding an interior decorator for Jason's new estate. She was whining about how Natalie had left the guest bathrooms looking completely outdated, completely ignoring the fact that Natalie had paid for the entire house. Jamal did not announce his arrival. He walked straight into their master bedroom, pulled a suitcase from the closet, and began packing. He methodically gathered his tailored suits, his collection of watches, and his important documents. He was leaving nothing behind. The thud of his shoes hitting the empty suitcase caught Olivia's attention. She ended the call and appeared in the doorway, her eyebrows drawn together in deep annoyance. "What are you doing?" she demanded, crossing her arms defensively. "Are you going on a trip? You did not tell me you were traveling. We have dinner with Jason and Amber on Friday, and you are paying." Jamal paused, looking at the woman he spent 5 years trying to please. "I am not going on a trip, Olivia," he said evenly. "I am leaving you." Olivia let out a sharp laugh, assuming this was a minor argument. Her sense of entitlement was so deeply ingrained that she genuinely could not comprehend a reality where Jamal would actually walk away from her. "Do not be dramatic, Jamal. Put the suitcase away. You are not leaving." "I have never been more serious," Jamal said, zipping the suitcase closed. "I spent years biting my tongue while your family treated me like a second-class citizen. I sat through countless dinners listening to your mother make passive-aggressive comments about my background. I watched your brother openly disrespect me while letting me pick up expensive restaurant checks. But what Jason did to Natalie was the final straw." Olivia rolled her eyes. "Are we talking about Natalie again?" Jason simply took back what was rightfully his. She was a terrible, cold wife. He drained her savings. Jamal fired back, his voice booming with authority that made Olivia flinch. He forged her legal signature to steal a property and illegally drained their joint emergency fund to buy a luxury car for his mistress. And you stood there and cheered for him. You are entirely morally bankrupt, just like your mother. Jamal reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He visited his lawyer 3 weeks ago, but was too afraid of the family fallout to serve the papers. Natalie's warning gave him the push he desperately needed. He tossed the envelope onto the bed. "Those are divorce papers," he stated coldly. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding the lease. I suggest you call Jason and ask for a loan because I froze all our joint credit cards an hour ago. You no longer have access to my salary." Olivia stared at the envelope in pure panic. "You cannot do this to me!" she screamed hysterically. "I am your wife. You are supposed to support me. You owe me. I do not owe you a single dime," Jamal replied, walking past her. "Have a nice life, Olivia." The front door slammed shut, echoing through the loft. Olivia stood frozen before collapsing onto the bed in hysterical tears. She grabbed her phone and immediately dialed Jason. When he answered, Olivia unleashed a frantic, sobbing narrative painting herself as the ultimate victim of a cruel husband who abandoned her for absolutely no reason. On the other end, Jason and Beatrice immediately rallied around her, feeding eagerly into her delusions. They cursed Jamal, calling him ungrateful. They assured Olivia she was better off without him, boasting that their family was wealthy and completely untouchable. Jason promised to hire her the best divorce lawyer in the city, using his newfound equity, completely unaware that his own equity was a massive illusion. Huddled together in their stolen house, wrapped in their toxic echo chamber, they blindly cheered each other on, totally oblivious to the massive financial hurricane racing toward their front door. The morning after Olivia arrived at the house in tears, Jason woke up feeling like the undisputed patriarch of his family. He had promised his sister the best divorce attorney money could buy, completely intoxicated by the illusion of his own wealth. To fulfill that promise and to finally launch the risky tech startup he had been talking about for years, Jason needed liquid cash. He looked at the massive house around him and saw nothing but a giant free piggy bank just waiting to be cracked open. He put on his best tailored suit, the one I had bought him for our anniversary, and drove Amber's new electric SUV to a premium bank branch in the upscale commercial district. He walked through the heavy glass doors with his chest puffed out, radiating the unearned confidence of a man who thought he had cheated the system and won. Jason was quickly escorted into a private glass office to meet with a senior loan officer named Mr. Harrison. Jason sat down in the plush leather chair, crossed his legs, and confidently placed a copy of the forged quitclaim deed on the mahogany desk. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together, ready to play the role of a wealthy real estate mogul. "I am looking to open a home equity line of credit," Jason announced smoothly. $200,000 should do it for now. I am launching a highly disruptive tech platform, and I want to leverage some of the dead equity sitting in my primary residence. Mr. Harrison smiled politely, impressed by Jason's expensive suit and the prestigious address listed on the paperwork. $200,000 is a very reasonable request for a property in that neighborhood, Mr. Harrison said, taking the deed. Assuming the house is owned free and clear, the underwriting process should be incredibly straightforward. We just need to pull your credit file and run a standard title search to verify the equity. Jason waved his hand dismissively. Run whatever you need. The house is fully paid off. There is absolutely no mortgage on it. My mother holds the title now, but I have her full power of attorney to execute this loan. Just tell me where to sign. Mr. Harrison nodded, typing rapidly on his keyboard. He excused himself to speak with the underwriting department, leaving Jason alone in the office. Jason felt a surge of absolute triumph. He pulled out his phone and texted his mistress, telling her they were going to celebrate with a luxury shopping spree that weekend. He genuinely believed that within an hour, $200,000 would magically appear in his checking account. 15 minutes later, the glass door clicked open. Mr. Harrison walked back into the office, but his demeanor had completely changed. The polite, eager smile was gone. He looked visibly uncomfortable, his face pale as he sat back down at his desk. He did not bring a pen for Jason to sign. Instead, he slid Jason's paperwork back across the mahogany desk. I am sorry, Jason, Mr. Harrison said, clearing his throat nervously. But we absolutely cannot approve this loan. In fact, your application has been automatically flagged and denied by our underwriting software. Jason stared at the loan officer, his confident smile vanishing instantly. Denied. What are you talking about? My credit score is excellent, and that house is easily worth over $1 million. It is completely paid off. That is the problem, Mr. Harrison replied, tapping his finger against a freshly printed document. The property is not paid off, not even close. We ran the title search, and the property is heavily encumbered. You do not have the equity you think you do. Jason felt a hot flash of anger. That is impossible. I know exactly how that house was purchased. We put down a massive cash deposit, and there was never a traditional mortgage from any major bank. Your system must be making a mistake. Banks do not make mistakes on title searches, Jason. Mr. Harrison said, his tone growing a bit more firm. There is no traditional mortgage from a bank, you are right about that. However, there is a massive primary lien legally attached to the property. It is a commercial loan document properly filed and recorded with the county. Jason leaned forward, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. A commercial loan. For how much? Mr. Harrison looked directly at Jason. $600,000. The color completely drained from Jason's face. The room suddenly felt suffocatingly small. 600,000, Jason repeated, his voice cracking. Who holds a $600,000 lien on my house? Mr. Harrison pushed the title report across the desk and pointed to a line of bold text near the bottom of the page. The lien is held by a private commercial entity, Mr. Harrison read aloud. A company called Vanguard Holdings, LLC. Jason stared blankly at the words printed on the paper. Vanguard Holdings, LLC. The name meant absolutely nothing to him. He sat in the premium bank office, completely baffled, entirely unaware that the trap I had quietly set was finally beginning to close around him. Jason stormed out of the bank branch, his leather shoes slamming against the pavement. He was furious. He refused to believe he made a mistake. He immediately called his mother. Beatrice answered eagerly, expecting to hear he secured the funds. Instead, Jason frantically explained the rejection. He told her about the $600,000 commercial lien, blocking his loan held by a mysterious private company called Vanguard Holdings, LLC. Beatrice gasped in exaggerated horror. She jumped to the most illogical conclusion possible. She insisted that I committed massive financial fraud. In her twisted mind, I secretly took out a massive commercial loan against the property, right before Jason transferred the deed, attempting to saddle them with corporate debt. This wild delusion shifted Jason from panic to violent indignation. He rushed back to the house, picked up his mother, and drove aggressively toward the downtown financial district. They were not going to hire a lawyer to review the title or contact the bank for clarification. They were going to do what entitled people always do when faced with a problem they do not understand. They were going to throw a massive public tantrum. My corporate consulting firm occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek modern glass skyscraper right in the heart of downtown Chicago. The lobby of my firm was specifically designed to intimidate. It featured imported dark Italian marble floors, towering floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and a massive reception desk carved from a single solid block of slate. It was an environment of absolute quiet professionalism where multi-million-dollar corporate restructuring deals were negotiated daily. It was the absolute worst place in the city to throw a hysterical tantrum. Jason and Beatrice pushed violently through the heavy revolving doors, completely out of breath and radiating frantic, chaotic energy. Jason marched straight up to the front desk, rudely bypassing a line of sharply dressed corporate executives waiting to check in. He slammed his hand flat against the slate counter, startling the 2 professional receptionists. "I need to see Natalie right now," Jason demanded, his voice echoing loudly across the pristine marble lobby. "Tell her to get down here immediately." The lead receptionist, a highly trained professional named Claire, calmly adjusted her headset and looked at Jason with practiced indifference. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" she asked politely. "Natalie is currently leading a critical board meeting and cannot be disturbed unless it is a dire emergency." "This is an emergency," Beatrice snapped, stepping up beside her son and pointing a manicured finger directly at Claire's face. "She committed massive financial fraud against my family. We know exactly what she did with the house, and we are not leaving this building until she comes down here and explains herself." Several high-level executives sitting in the waiting area lowered their financial newspapers and tablets, turning to watch the bizarre spectacle. Jason felt the eyes on him, and instead of feeling embarrassed, his fragile ego urged him to perform for the crowd. He wanted everyone in that prestigious firm to think his ex-wife was a criminal. "Call her down here right now!" Jason yelled, his face turning an angry shade of bright red. "Tell her I know all about Vanguard Holdings. Tell her I know she secretly took out a $600,000 fraudulent loan to try and bankrupt my family. You tell her that if she does not come down here and remove that illegal lien immediately, I am calling the police and having her arrested for white-collar crime." Claire did not flinch or show fear. She simply picked up her sleek office phone and dialed my private extension. While she waited for me to answer, Jason paced back and forth across the marble floor like an enraged animal. Beatrice stood by the desk crossing her arms and glaring at anyone who dared to look in her direction. She loudly muttered about how she always knew I was a manipulative, money-hungry woman who never belonged in their respectable family. They were putting on a spectacular show of pure, unadulterated ignorance. They genuinely believed that by storming my workplace and screaming legal terms, they did not understand they could bully me into submission. They thought the threat of public embarrassment would force me to quickly erase a massive commercial debt to save face. Upstairs in the quiet glass conference room, my desk phone buzzed. I listened to Claire explain the chaotic situation unfolding in the lobby. I looked down at the busy city streets, far below, a cold smile spreading across my face. They had walked right into the center of my world. They wanted a public explanation of Vanguard Holdings, and I was more than happy to give them exactly what they asked for. I stepped out of the executive boardroom on the 30th floor and walked toward the glass elevators overlooking the main lobby. Through the transparent floor-to-ceiling panels, I could see the chaos unfolding far below. Jason was pacing wildly. His face flushed a bright, angry red, while Beatrice stood nearby with her arms crossed, looking like an angry hornet. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy blue designer suit, checked my reflection in the polished steel doors, and pressed the down button. The elevator descended smoothly. I felt no fear, no anxiety, and certainly no guilt. I was a predator descending upon prey that had willingly walked right into my cage. The silver doors chimed softly and slid open onto the marble floor. Claire, my lead receptionist, met my eyes with a look of immense relief. I gave her a subtle nod of appreciation before turning my attention to my former family. Jason immediately lunged forward, pointing his manicured finger right at my face. Before he could utter a single word of his rehearsed tirade, I raised my hand in a sharp, commanding gesture that stopped him dead in his tracks. "We are not doing this in the lobby," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the absolute authority of a senior executive. "Follow me." I did not wait for his response. I turned on my heel and walked down the wide corridor toward the executive meeting suites. I heard their heavy footsteps following closely behind, accompanied by Beatrice loudly muttering under her breath about my supposed arrogance. I opened the heavy glass door to Conference Room 3, a stark, ultra-modern space, enclosed entirely in soundproof glass. A massive slab of polished concrete served as the table, surrounded by 12 ergonomic leather chairs. The room overlooked the bustling city below, a stark reminder of the corporate machine I operated within every single day. I walked to the head of the concrete table and stood there. I did not offer them a seat. Jason stormed in, followed closely by his mother, who immediately began inspecting the expensive modern art on the walls with blatant disgust. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind them, sealing us inside. The soundproof room instantly swallowed all the background noise of the busy office, leaving a heavy, oppressive silence. Jason could not handle the quiet for more than 3 seconds. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out the crumpled bank denial letter, and slammed it down onto the table with violent force. "Explain this!" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and panic. He slammed his fist next to the paper. "You went behind my back and committed massive financial fraud. You took out a secret $600,000 commercial loan against my house right before I transferred the deed. You are trying to sabotage my business loan and bankrupt my mother." Beatrice stepped forward, her face twisted in a nasty scowl. "You belong in a federal prison, Natalie," she hissed viciously. "We always knew you were a deceitful, money-hungry snake. You probably forged documents to get that money." Jason nodded vigorously, clearly emboldened by his mother backing him up. "I am giving you exactly one chance to fix this," Jason commanded, leaning over the massive table. "You're going to call this Vanguard Holdings company right now. You're going to pay off whatever fraudulent second mortgage you took out, and you are going to clear my title. If you refuse, we are walking straight to the police station and showing them exactly how you tried to steal from us." I looked down at the crumpled piece of paper, then back up at the 2 people who had made my life a living nightmare for the past 5 years. They were so incredibly confident in their absolute ignorance. They truly believed they had caught me in a criminal conspiracy. I slowly reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick, meticulously organized legal binder I had prepared days ago. I placed it gently onto the concrete table and slid it across the smooth surface until it rested right in front of Jason. "I did not take out a secret loan, Jason," I said calmly, resting my hands firmly on the edge of the table. "And I am not going to call Vanguard Holdings." Jason glared at me, his chest heaving with arrogant indignation. "And why exactly is that?" he demanded loudly. I smiled. It was the same chilling, calculated smile I had given Beatrice on the patio a month ago. "Because I am the bank," I replied smoothly. "I am the sole owner and CEO of Vanguard Holdings, LLC. Jason stared at me, his mouth slightly open, processing the words but refusing to understand their meaning. The heavy silence in the soundproof conference room stretched on for several excruciating seconds. Then Jason let out a short, forced laugh. It was the sound of a man desperately clinging to his delusion. "You are lying!" Jason scoffed, shaking his head and looking at his mother for validation. "You are completely bluffing. Vanguard Holdings is a massive commercial management firm. The bank underwriter told me so. There is no way you own it. You are just a consultant." I did not argue. I simply flipped open the heavy leather binder resting on the polished concrete table. I turned to the first tab, slid out a crisp, notarized document, and pushed it toward him. It was the Articles of Organization for Vanguard Holdings, LLC, filed with the Illinois Secretary of State 6 years ago. My name was clearly printed on the primary line as the sole managing member and registered agent. Jason looked down at the paper. His forced smile faltered. Beatrice leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the legal jargon, desperately looking for a loophole that did not exist. "Let me walk you through the brutal financial reality of your situation, Jason," I said, keeping my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. 5 years ago, before we were even engaged, I bought that beautiful suburban house. But I did not buy it under my personal name. I am a corporate restructuring consultant. I know how to protect my assets. I purchased the property entirely through Vanguard Holdings. It was a smart, clean corporate investment. I slowly turned to the second tab in the binder, pulling out a thick stack of stapled papers. "Then we got married," I continued, locking eyes with him. "And you could not handle the fact that you were living in a house owned by your wife. Your fragile ego could not take it. You threw a massive tantrum, claiming you needed your name on the deed to feel like a real man, to feel like the true provider of the family. You demanded equal ownership, even though you contributed absolutely nothing to the down payment." Jason swallowed hard, the memory of his own insecurity clearly flashing behind his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "So I agreed," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I told you I would put your name on the deed. But what I actually did was structure a highly specific real estate transaction. Vanguard Holdings did not just give you half a house for free, Jason. Vanguard Holdings sold the house to us jointly. We bypassed a traditional bank entirely. I used a legally binding mechanism called seller financing." I pushed the thick stack of papers across the table. It was the original mortgage contract. It was 150 pages of dense, complex legal terminology printed on heavy stock paper. "When we sat in that title office 4 years ago, you were so incredibly eager to see your name printed on the property deed that you did not bother to read a single word of the actual contract," I explained, watching the color completely drain from his face. "You just signed exactly where the notary told you to sign. You signed a legally binding promissory note. You and I did not own that house free and clear, Jason. We owed Vanguard Holdings $600,000. Jason picked up the heavy document with trembling hands. He flipped to the signature page. There it was, in stark black ink. His own signature pledging his financial liability to my corporate entity. His face went entirely white, matching the crisp collar of his expensive dress shirt. The arrogant, chest-puffing man who had paraded his pregnant mistress around my backyard was completely gone. In his place sat a terrified little boy who suddenly realized he had walked directly into a massive financial trap. "You tricked me," Jason whispered, his voice cracking. "You set me up. I did not trick you, I replied coldly. I handed you a contract, and you chose not to read it. You chose to act like a wealthy real estate mogul without understanding the first thing about commercial finance. You thought you could just cross my name off a piece of paper and walk away with $1 million asset. But all you actually did was steal a house that comes with a $600,000 mortgage attached to it. Beatrice let out a sharp gasp, taking a physical step back from the table as if the binder itself might attack her. She finally understood. Her son was not a genius. He had not outsmarted anyone. He had just unknowingly handcuffed himself and his mother to a mountain of crushing corporate debt. But they still did not understand the absolute worst part of what he had done. They did not know about the trigger. I did not give them a single second to process the crushing weight of the mortgage debt. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cold concrete table, and tapped my manicured fingernail directly beneath Jason's signature. But a massive mortgage is only half of your problem, Jason, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the soundproof room. Turn to page 12. I highlighted it in bright yellow so you would not miss it. Jason swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He fumbled with the thick stack of papers, his hands shaking so violently that he nearly tore the heavy stock pages. He flipped to page 12, his eyes desperately scanning the bright yellow block of text I had marked. That is the due on sale clause, I explained, projecting my voice so Beatrice could hear every single devastating syllable from where she stood. It is a standard protective measure in almost all commercial real estate loans. It dictates that if the property title is transferred, sold, or gifted to a third party, without the express written consent of the lender, the contract is automatically breached. Jason looked up from the paper, his eyes wide and bloodshot. His brain was struggling to comprehend the dense corporate legalese. What does that mean? He croaked, his voice entirely stripped of its former arrogance. What happens if it is breached? It means the loan is accelerated, I replied smoothly. It means you do not get 30 years to pay off the balance. It means the moment you filed that forged quitclaim deed, transferring the ownership of my house to your mother, you triggered a total default. The entire $600,000 principal plus tens of thousands in penalty interest and administrative fees is due immediately. Jason physically recoiled, staggering back from the table, as if the binder had suddenly caught fire. You cannot do that, he stammered, his chest heaving as panic fully set in. I will just undo it. I will transfer the deed back into our names right now. I will tear the paper up. You cannot tear up a document that has already been recorded with the county clerk, Jason, I said, shaking my head at his absolute sheer ignorance. You made it a matter of public record. You thought you were executing a flawless, genius legal maneuver to steal my equity and leave me homeless. You thought you could just cross my name off a piece of paper. But all you actually did was pull the pin out of a massive financial grenade and hand it directly to your mother. I shifted my gaze past Jason, locking eyes with Beatrice. She was standing frozen near the glass wall, clutching her designer handbag against her chest like a shield. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking haggard and terrified. That is right, Beatrice, I said, my tone completely merciless. Jason did not give you a free $1 million mansion. He gave you a property heavily encumbered by a defaulted commercial lien. As the new legal owner listed on the county deed, you are now standing directly in the blast zone. Beatrice let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She turned her horrified gaze toward her son. Is this true, Jason? She shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the enclosed space. Did you saddle me with a $600,000 debt, Mom? I did not know. Jason pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. I thought she paid cash. I thought the house was clear. You thought wrong, I interrupted sharply, bringing their attention back to me. Vanguard Holdings formally issued the notice of default yesterday afternoon. You have exactly 30 days to produce $600,000 in liquid cash. Since your credit is heavily tied up and your precious new tech startup has absolutely zero revenue, no bank on earth will touch you. We both know you drained our joint savings to buy Amber a car. You have absolutely no capital. Jason slammed his hands down on the concrete table, his face contorting with desperate rage. You are destroying my life over a house, he yelled, a vein bulging in his neck. You are trying to bankrupt my mother just to punish me. I stood up, towering over him from across the table. I did not destroy your life, Jason, I stated with absolute finality. You destroyed your own life the second you brought your pregnant mistress to my patio and told me to pack my bags. You wanted to play the ruthless real estate tycoon. You wanted to take control. Well, you are in control now. But in the corporate world, when you forge signatures and breach commercial contracts, you do not get to walk away. Welcome to the big leagues, Jason. Your execution date is set and the bill is due. Beatrice's knees finally gave out. She sank heavily into one of the ergonomic leather chairs, the sharp click of her expensive heels scraping violently against the polished concrete floor. Her chest began to heave erratically. The reality of a $600,000 debt was a physical weight pressing down on her lungs. She started hyperventilating, her perfectly manicured hands clawing frantically at the high collar of her silk blouse, as if she were suffocating. The math was doing dizzying circles in her head. She realized that her small condo, her meager pension, and her entire retirement safety net were suddenly all at risk of being completely wiped out. She looked at me, not with the haughty disdain she had weaponized for 5 years, but with pure, unadulterated terror. "You are a monster." Beatrice gasped, her voice trembling as she struggled to draw a full breath. "You are a cold-blooded sociopath. We are your family. You are intentionally bankrupting a senior citizen. You planned this from the very beginning. You set my son up to fail so you could steal his future." "I did not force your son to commit felony forgery, Beatrice," I replied, my voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. "I did not force him to bring his pregnant mistress to my patio, and I certainly did not force him to try and steal my property. You both dug this massive financial grave with your own hands, fueled entirely by your own greed. I am simply the one throwing the dirt on top of you." That was the absolute breaking point for Jason. His mother was hyperventilating in a chair, his massive real estate victory had evaporated into thin air, and the woman he thought he had completely crushed was standing over him with absolute authority. His fragile ego shattered entirely. He could not fix this with his usual smooth talking, and he could not gaslight his way out of a legally binding commercial contract. With a guttural yell, Jason kicked his heavy leather chair backward. It slammed into the soundproof glass wall with a loud, violent thud. He lunged across the wide concrete table, his face twisted in blinding, violent rage. He reached out his hands, curling into tight fists, clearly intending to grab me by the collar of my suit or drag me across the polished surface. "I will end you, Natalie," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I will tear this entire building down. You are not going to take everything away from me. I will kill you before I let you take my house." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back to retreat. I simply pressed the small, discreet silver security button located just under the lip of the concrete table. But I hardly even needed to push it. Through the transparent glass panels, my corporate security team had already seen Jason kick the chair and aggressively lunge across the table. Before Jason's fingers could even graze the premium fabric of my jacket, the heavy glass door burst open. 4 massive, highly trained corporate security officers swarmed the room in a sudden blur of black suits. 2 of them grabbed Jason by the arms, twisting him backward with ruthless, practiced efficiency. They slammed him face down onto the cold concrete table, pinning his arms firmly behind his back. "Get your hands off me," Jason roared, thrashing wildly against their crushing grip. "Do you know who I am? Let me go right now." The lead security officer, a massive man with a stern, unforgiving expression, leaned down close to Jason's ear. "You are a trespasser making physical threats against our chief executive," he stated in a deep, booming voice that commanded absolute obedience. "If you do not stop resisting immediately, we will bypass the building escort and call the police to arrest you for aggravated assault." Hearing the word arrest finally pierced through Jason's violent panic. He remembered the forged document he had filed with the county. He knew a police investigation would ruin him instantly. He went entirely limp against the concrete table, breathing heavily, completely defeated. The officers hauled him up to his feet, keeping a firm, bruising grip on both of his arms. A third officer approached Beatrice, who was still gasping for air and crying in her chair. "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises immediately." the officer instructed firmly, pointing toward the open door. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, clutching her designer handbag tightly to her chest. She looked at me one last time, her eyes wide with a mixture of pure hatred and absolute fear. She had no clever insults left to throw. She had no arrogant threats to make about the homeowners association. She just turned and hurried out the door, her heels clicking frantically as she practically ran away. The security team marched Jason out of the conference room, frog marching him down the wide, brightly lit corporate corridor. I followed a few steps behind, watching the spectacular show unfold. They paraded him directly through the center of the executive floor. Dozens of high-powered consultants, senior partners, and wealthy corporate clients stopped their multi-million-dollar conversations to watch. Jason kept his head down, his face burning with profound humiliation. These were the exact types of wealthy, influential people he had always desperately wanted to impress. He wanted to be seen as a titan of industry. Instead, he was being dragged out of a skyscraper like a common thug. When they reached the main lobby, Claire watched them approach from behind her slate desk. She did not say a single word, but the highly satisfied smirk on her face spoke volumes. The security officers pushed Jason through the heavy revolving doors, physically depositing him onto the busy downtown sidewalk right next to his weeping mother. I stood safely inside the air-conditioned lobby, watching Jason adjust his rumpled suit jacket in utter defeat. They had come to my territory expecting to bully me. Instead, they had been physically thrown onto the street, humiliated, exposed, and burdened with a crushing corporate debt. Down on the bustling Chicago sidewalk, the midday sun was beating down on the concrete, reflecting harshly off the towering glass skyscrapers of the financial district. Jason stood there breathing heavily, his hands resting on his knees as he tried to gather himself. His expensive tailored suit was rumpled, the collar of his dress shirt askew from the firm grip of my security team. Beside him, Beatrice was trembling, holding her designer handbag against her chest like a shield, her eyes darting nervously at the pedestrians walking past. They had been physically ejected from my domain, stripped of their power and their dignity, in front of the very corporate elite Jason always desperately wanted to impress. But Jason was a man whose entire identity was built on a fragile foundation of arrogance and pure denial. As the initial shock of the physical removal began to wear off, the cold panic inside him quickly mutated back into blinding defensive rage. He absolutely refused to look defeated in front of his mother, and he certainly refused to accept that a woman he viewed as inferior had utterly outmaneuvered him. He straightened his posture aggressively, yanking on the lapels of his suit jacket to smooth out the wrinkles. He turned around on his expensive leather shoes and glared up at the sheer glass face of my office building. He tipped his head back, his eyes searching the towering rows of windows, until he found the 30th floor. Jason took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and began to scream at the top of his lungs. He did not care about the busy professionals walking past him on their lunch breaks, carrying their briefcases and coffees. He did not care about the security guards standing just inside the revolving doors, watching him with quiet amusement. He pointed his finger directly up at my window and unleashed a frantic, desperate tirade. "Fine!" Jason roared, his voice cracking slightly under the strain of his own shouting. "We will not pay you a single dime. Do you hear me? Go ahead and foreclose on the property. Take the house back. We will just declare bankruptcy, and we will walk away completely clean. You are not getting any money out of us." Beatrice reached out timidly, tugging at his sleeve, urging him to stop making a public scene and embarrassing them further. But Jason shook her off, fully intoxicated by his own false bravado. He actually smiled, convinced he had just found the ultimate loophole to my trap. In his financially illiterate mind, bankruptcy was nothing more than a magic eraser. He genuinely believed it was a simple administrative reset button that people pressed when they made a bad investment. He thought he could simply hand the keys back to Vanguard Holdings, file a single piece of paperwork in civil court, and walk away without a single consequence to his credit score, his career, or his future. He thought he had outsmarted the system once again. High above the noisy street, inside the quiet sanctuary of the soundproof glass conference room, I stood perfectly still. I looked down through the thick pane of floor-to-ceiling glass, watching his pathetic performance unfold on the sidewalk below. I could not hear his frantic shouting through the heavy commercial insulation, but I did not need to. I could read his aggressive body language perfectly. I watched his face turn bright red. I saw the veins popping in his neck, and I watched his mouth form the words as he screamed up at my floor like a petulant child. A cold, deeply satisfied smile touched the corners of my mouth. His absolute ignorance was truly breathtaking. Bankruptcy was designed to protect honest people who fell on hard times due to medical emergencies or sudden job losses. It was a civil protection. It was absolutely not a magic shield designed to protect a man who had actively forged a legal signature on a county-recorded deed to steal $1 million piece of real estate. You cannot discharge a debt that was incurred through intentional fraud. And more importantly, bankruptcy court does not stop a criminal investigation. I turned away from the window, walking slowly back toward the polished concrete conference table. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I swiped open the screen and tapped the contact name for David, the ruthless lead attorney of my corporate legal team. He answered on the second ring, his tone sharp and ready for instruction. "David," I said, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly measured. "My former husband was just escorted out of the building. He seems to be under the highly mistaken impression that he can simply declare bankruptcy to escape the $600,000 commercial lien he triggered today." I heard David chuckle softly on the other end of the line. "He thinks bankruptcy will save him from a felony fraud charge," I continued, my eyes drifting back toward the window where Jason was still pacing frantically on the sidewalk. "Let us disabuse him of that notion. File the formal police report for the forged quitclaim deed immediately and initiate the foreclosure proceedings with the county clerk. I want him served with both sets of papers by the end of the week. Let us see how confident he feels when the detectives knock on his door." 3 days passed since the humiliating scene outside my office building. Inside the sprawling suburban house, Jason spent those 72 hours desperately trying to construct a false reality. He assured his mother and his pregnant mistress his lawyer was handling everything. He spun wild tales about how my company would be sanctioned for predatory lending. He tried projecting the image of a man fully in control, resuming his daily routine of lounging by the expensive new baby furniture and drinking premium coffee. But the oppressive silence betrayed his deep anxiety. Every time a car drove past, he flinched. On Thursday morning, the illusion finally shattered. A white sedan pulled into the long driveway. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out holding a thick manila envelope. He did not resemble a delivery driver. He moved with the highly efficient precision of someone who delivered bad news for a living. He walked up the stone pathway, bypassed the decorative seasonal wreath on the front door, and pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed loudly through the high ceilings of the foyer. Beatrice answered the door. She wore her usual silk robe, a cup of herbal tea in her hand, fully expecting a package containing more expensive imported baby clothes. Instead, the man in the gray suit looked at her with a blank, professional expression. "Are you Beatrice?" he asked, his tone flat. When she nodded, slightly confused, he extended his arm and pressed the heavy envelope directly against her chest. "You have been formally served," he stated clearly. He did not wait for a response. He simply turned around, walked briskly back to his white sedan, and drove away. Beatrice stood in the doorway, the cool morning air washing over her face. She looked down at the thick envelope. The return address boldly displayed the name of my corporate legal firm. Her hands began to tremble violently. She dropped her teacup, shattering it against the hardwood floor, spilling warm liquid across the expensive Brazilian cherry wood she previously accused me of scratching. She ripped the top of the envelope open and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. The header of the first page was printed in bold black ink. "Notice of default and intent to foreclose." She scanned the dense legal text, her eyes widening with absolute horror as her brain processed the numbers. The document clearly stated that Vanguard Holdings was calling the loan in its entirety due to a direct violation of the transfer clause. It demanded the immediate payment of the $600,000 principal. But the numbers did not stop there. The document itemized an additional $45,000 in penalty interest administrative fines and accelerated legal fees. Below the staggering financial total was the absolute deadline. She had exactly 30 days to produce $645,000 in certified liquid cash. If the funds were not deposited by the close of business on the 30th day, the property would immediately go to public auction. The county sheriff would be dispatched to physically remove all occupants from the premises. There were no payment plans available. There was no room for negotiation. It was an absolute financial guillotine, and the blade was already dropping. Beatrice let out a guttural sob that echoed through the empty foyer. Jason came rushing down the grand staircase, his heavy footsteps thudding against the carpet. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw his mother standing over a shattered teacup, clutching the legal documents against her chest as if she had just been shot. "What happened?" Jason demanded, rushing over and snatching the papers from her trembling hands. His eyes darted across the notice of default. He saw the demand for $645,000. His arrogant bankruptcy theory instantly collapsed. Beatrice looked at him, her face pale. "You said you could fix this," she shrieked. "You said you would declare bankruptcy and we would walk away clean. But my name is on this deed now. They are coming after my credit and my pension." Jason stared blankly at the paper, suddenly realizing the catastrophic nature of his scheme. By forging my name and transferring the house to his mother, he had not protected his assets. He had actively transferred the debt directly onto Beatrice. As the sole owner of record, she was solely responsible for the default. If she could not pay, the bank would seek a deficiency judgment against her remaining assets to cover the massive fees. "We are going to be completely homeless," Beatrice sobbed, sinking to her knees in the entryway. "You stole a house we cannot afford, and now I will lose everything I have ever worked for." While Jason and Beatrice were drowning in the sudden realization of their massive $645,000 debt, I was already moving forward with the next phase of my carefully orchestrated plan. The financial ruin was simply the natural consequence of their own greed, but forging a signature on a county-recorded property deed was a severe crime against the state. I did not just want my real estate back. I wanted Jason to face the absolute maximum legal penalty for his sheer arrogance. On Tuesday morning, I walked confidently into the downtown headquarters of the Chicago Police Department. I sat across a dented metal desk from a seasoned detective in the white-collar crime division. I did not come with an emotional story or tears. I came with a perfectly organized legal binder. I handed the detective the original Vanguard Holdings mortgage contract, a certified copy of the illegally recorded quitclaim deed, and a sworn corporate affidavit proving I was leading a board meeting in New York on the exact date my signature was supposedly notarized in Illinois. The detective took one look at the sloppy forgery and the undeniable timeline discrepancy. He immediately opened a formal criminal investigation. The wheels of justice turned remarkably fast when presented with irrefutable documentary evidence. 2 days later, Jason was sitting at his large mahogany desk in his corner office. As a regional sales director at a mid-sized logistics firm, he heavily relied on his corporate title to inflate his fragile ego. Through the glass walls of his office, his subordinates could see him staring blankly at his glowing computer screen. He was sweating profusely, completely ignoring his ringing desk phone. He was desperately trying to calculate how to hide the impending foreclosure from his pregnant mistress, while simultaneously wondering if he could somehow take out a predatory payday loan to hire a defense attorney. He genuinely thought his week could not possibly get any worse. He was profoundly mistaken. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy double doors of the sales department swung open. 2 tall men wearing sharp dark suits and stern expressions walked directly onto the busy sales floor. They did not stop at the front reception desk to ask for an appointment. They moved with absolute uncompromising authority. The loud chatter of 50 sales representatives aggressively hitting their weekly quotas suddenly died down. Keyboards stopped clicking. Everyone turned in their swivel chairs to watch as the 2 unsmiling men marched straight toward the glass-walled corner office. Jason looked up from his monitor just as the lead detective pushed his glass door open without knocking. Jason stood up immediately, instinctively putting on his best fake charismatic smile. He thought they were high-level corporate auditors or perhaps potential investors taking a tour of the facility. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Jason asked, smoothing his expensive silk tie and puffing out his chest. The lead detective reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a gold badge, and held it up to the fluorescent light. "Jason, we are detectives with the Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Unit," the detective stated. His voice was loud, deep, and carried effortlessly through the open office door. "We are here to question you regarding a fraudulent quitclaim deed filed with the county clerk last month." The fake smile instantly vanished from Jason's face. The blood drained completely from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly pale. His subordinates gathered outside the glass walls, openly staring and whispering among themselves. Jason swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. He desperately tried to lower his voice. "Gentlemen, there has been a massive misunderstanding," Jason whispered frantically, waving his hands to try and calm them down. "It is just a messy divorce dispute with my bitter ex-wife. It is strictly a civil matter, not a police issue. Let us step outside into the hallway and talk about this quietly. Forgery of a legal property document is a Class 3 felony in the state of Illinois." The second detective replied loudly, completely ignoring Jason's desperate plea for privacy. "We have sworn affidavits and time-stamped corporate flight records proving your wife was out of state when her signature was allegedly notarized on that deed. Do not try to insult our intelligence by calling this a civil dispute. You committed a severe federal offense to steal $1 million asset." Jason began to hyperventilate. His entire carefully crafted professional image was disintegrating right in front of the people he managed. He reached for his desk phone, stammering incoherently about needing to call his lawyer. The lead detective stepped forward, grabbed Jason by the wrist, and firmly pulled his arm behind his back. "Turn around and place your hands flat on the desk," the detective ordered. Jason let out a pathetic whimper and complied. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked loudly into place. The sharp sound echoed through the dead, silent sales floor. The detective looked Jason right in the eye and spoke the words that finalized his complete destruction. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The walk from the coroner office to the main elevator banks felt like an eternity for Jason. With his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, he was forced to march past the very people he had spent years intimidating and micromanaging. The entire sales floor was dead silent, save for the heavy footsteps of the two detectives leading him away. He kept his chin tucked into his chest, his face burning with a level of humiliation he had never known was possible. He was loaded into the back of an unmarked police cruiser in broad daylight, right in the middle of the busy commercial district. The man who had prided himself on wearing tailored suits and giving motivational speeches about corporate dominance was now just another white-collar criminal sitting on a hard plastic seat. His sudden arrest sent immediate shockwaves through his company. Corporate logistics firms do not tolerate public scandals, especially when they involve high-ranking regional directors committing felony fraud. Before Jason even reached the downtown precinct to be fingerprinted and processed, the Human Resources Department had already convened an emergency meeting. His corporate email was locked. His access badge was instantly deactivated. He was officially placed on unpaid administrative suspension pending the outcome of the police investigation. Jason spent a terrifying, sleepless night in a holding cell. The stark concrete walls and harsh fluorescent lights were a brutal contrast to the luxury he had illegally tried to secure for himself. The next morning, Beatrice arrived at the precinct looking physically ill. She had been forced to empty the absolute last of her accessible checking account to pay a sleazy bail bondsman just to get her son out of jail. They walked out of the precinct in total silence, the crushing weight of their reality finally suffocating their delusions. But the nightmare was only just beginning. Less than 48 hours after the detectives pulled him out of his office, Jason received a formal, aggressively worded email from the senior vice president of Human Resources. There was no severance package negotiation. There was no polite transition period. The email cited a specific moral turpitude clause embedded deep within his executive employment contract. The clause strictly prohibited any employee from engaging in conduct that resulted in a felony arrest, as it irreparably damaged the reputation of the firm. He was terminated with absolute immediate cause. Jason sat at the granite kitchen island of the stolen house, staring at his phone screen in pure disbelief. The termination meant his massive six-figure salary, the sole source of income, currently keeping their lavish lifestyle afloat, vanished instantly. But the corporate guillotine did not stop at his paycheck. The email explicitly stated that his premium executive health insurance policy was canceled effective at the end of the month. A cold wave of dread washed over him as he realized Amber was heavily pregnant and required specialized, expensive medical care that he could no longer afford. Furthermore, the company demanded the immediate return of his corporate assets. The sleek, expensive company car he drove to the bank just days prior did not actually belong to him. It was a corporate fleet vehicle. The email warned that if the keys were not surrendered to a recovery agent by 5 o'clock that evening, they would officially report the vehicle as stolen. Jason had to walk out to the driveway completely numb and hand the keys over to a tow truck driver while his neighbors watched from their perfectly manicured lawns. By Friday evening, Jason returned to the sprawling, echoing living room of the million-dollar estate he had tried so desperately to steal. He had no car to drive. He had no job to go to on Monday morning. He had a pending criminal court date that carried the very real threat of a multi-year prison sentence. And hovering above all of it was the ticking time bomb of the $645,000 foreclosure demand. He collapsed onto the expensive velvet sofa he had purchased on credit just weeks ago. He buried his face in his hands, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Beatrice sat silently in the armchair across from him, staring blankly at the wall while Amber hovered nervously in the doorway, finally realizing the wealthy provider she thought she had secured was nothing more than a fraud. Jason was a completely broken man. He had played a high-stakes game of financial chess against a woman who built her entire career, destroying hostile corporate takeovers. He thought he was making a masterstroke, but all he had done was orchestrate his own spectacular, irreversible ruin. While Jason remained paralyzed on the velvet sofa, entirely broken by his sudden unemployment and impending criminal charges, Beatrice shifted into a frantic, desperate survival mode. She had spent her entire adult life believing that appearances were reality. In her mind, if she simply dressed well, hosted lavish parties, and associated with wealthy people, she was immune to the consequences of the lower class. She genuinely believed she could talk her way out of a $645,000 commercial default. Early Saturday morning, Beatrice sat alone at the massive granite kitchen island. The house was dead quiet save for the low hum of the expensive double-door refrigerator she had so proudly forbidden me from taking. She opened her laptop and navigated to her retirement portal. For years, she had relied on a modest state pension and a small retirement account accumulated from decades of mid-level administrative work. She typed in her password with trembling fingers, praying for a mathematical miracle that she knew deep down did not exist. The screen loaded, displaying her total vested balance. It was exactly $82,000. A cold sweat broke out across her neck, making her silk robe stick to her skin. Even if she completely liquidated every single penny she had saved for her old age, absorbing the massive early withdrawal penalties and the crushing federal tax liabilities, it would barely cover the administrative fines and penalty interest I had legally tacked onto the default notice. It would not even scratch the surface of the $600,000 principal. Her financial safety net, the one she had spent a lifetime slowly building, was absolutely useless against the corporate debt her son had strapped to her name. The terrifying reality of low-income housing and government assistance flashed before her eyes. But Beatrice was nothing if not stubbornly delusional. She slammed the laptop shut and reached for her smartphone. She refused to accept that she was going to be thrown out onto the street. Over the past month, she had hosted elaborate Sunday brunches, pouring expensive champagne and feeding imported cheeses to the wealthiest women in the Homeowners Association. She had positioned herself as the matriarch of a highly successful, affluent family. Surely these women would understand a temporary cash flow problem. Surely they would happily extend a short-term private loan to a dear friend in need. She scrolled through her contacts and tapped the name for Brenda, the highly judgmental HOA president who was married to a wealthy commercial real estate developer. Beatrice pressed the phone to her ear, forcing a bright, cheerful tone into her voice to mask the crushing panic. "Brenda, darling," Beatrice chirped as soon as the line connected. "I am so sorry to bother you on a weekend, but Jason and I have run into a tiny, absurd banking error regarding the title of our new estate. We need to secure a temporary bridge loan just for a few weeks to satisfy a ridiculous corporate lien. With your husband's vast connections, I was wondering if you could possibly help us out." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Brenda finally spoke, her voice was absolute ice. It lacked any of the fake warmth she had displayed while drinking Beatrice's mimosas just 2 weeks prior. "A tiny banking error." Brenda repeated, her tone dripping with pure condescension. "Beatrice, the entire neighborhood watched 2 police detectives march your son out of his office building in handcuffs. The entire neighborhood watched a corporate recovery agent tow away that electric SUV from your driveway yesterday afternoon. We all know he was fired for felony fraud." Beatrice felt the blood drain completely from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin a lie, but her throat clamped shut. The suburbs were a viciously transparent glass house, and her spectacular downfall was the ultimate entertainment. "Do not ever call this number again," Brenda stated coldly. "I do not lend money to criminals, and I certainly do not associate with people who forge documents to steal real estate. We have standards in this neighborhood. Your presence here is a complete disgrace to this community." The line went dead. Beatrice sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. She let out a ragged breath, her hands shaking violently, and frantically dialed another number. She called Patricia, a woman she had played tennis with just last week. The call went straight to voicemail. She dialed Helen, the neighborhood social chair. It rang once before disconnecting. Desperate and hyperventilating, she tried to send a lengthy text message to a group chat she had created for her new brunch friends, begging them to just hear her out. The message immediately bounced back with a glaring green bubble. Every single one of them had blocked her number. The social isolation hit her with the force of a physical blow. The crushing weight of her reality finally broke through her walls of denial. She was completely cut off. Sitting in the echoing silence of a massive luxury kitchen, she did not own. Beatrice finally understood the absolute truth. The high society she desperately wanted to join had chewed her up and spit her out the second she became a liability. She was entirely alone, completely bankrupt, and staring down the barrel of total homelessness. Jamal was standing in the kitchen of his new modern downtown loft, pouring a glass of sparkling water. The exposed brick walls and massive industrial windows offered a stunning view of the Chicago skyline as the sun began to set. For the first time in 5 years, his living space was entirely his own. There was no toxic gossip echoing down the hallway, no passive-aggressive remarks about his career choices, and absolutely no trace of his soon-to-be ex-wife. He was finally breathing clean air. His mind was clear, his bank accounts were secure, and his future was his own. The heavy silence of his sanctuary was suddenly shattered by the aggressive, frantic buzzing of the lobby intercom. Jamal set his glass down and glanced at the security monitor mounted on the wall. He let out a slow, exhausted sigh. Standing on the sidewalk, looking completely unhinged and desperate, was Olivia. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and her expensive mascara was visibly smeared beneath her eyes. He debated ignoring her entirely, but he knew the entitled women in that family would simply stand there and buzz the door until the police were called. He pressed the release button, unlocking the front entrance to get this over with. Moments later, a frantic pounding echoed against his solid wood apartment door. Jamal opened it to find Olivia standing in the hallway, practically hyperventilating. Before he could even offer a formal greeting, she pushed past him, marching straight into the center of his living room. She immediately launched into a hysterical, sobbing performance, waving her hands wildly as she paced across his pristine hardwood floor. "You have to help us, Jamal." Olivia cried, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. You have to save my mother. Jason has been arrested, he lost his job, and the bank is trying to steal the house. Natalie set us up. She slapped a $645,000 penalty on my mother, and they are going to throw her out on the street. You are the only one who can fix this disaster. Jamal closed the door, slowly leaning against the frame with his arms crossed over his chest. He did not offer her a tissue. He did not rush forward to comfort her. He simply watched her perform. I need you to cash out your tech stock options, Olivia demanded, her tone shifting seamlessly from begging to commanding. I know your company just had a massive quarter. I know you have the equity sitting right there in your portfolio. If you just wire the funds to my mother by Monday morning, we can clear this ridiculous corporate lien and everything can go back to normal. We are your family, Jamal. You owe it to us to step up and be a real man. Jamal looked at her with absolute unwavering coldness. The sheer audacity of her demand was breathtaking. She was demanding the financial fruits of his intense labor to save the very people who had actively tried to destroy his peace. I do not owe your family a single dime, Jamal stated, his deep voice incredibly calm and completely devoid of emotion. And I am absolutely not liquidating my hard-earned stock options to save your mother from a trap your brother built with his own two hands. Olivia gasped, clutching her chest, as if he had physically struck her. How can you be so cruel? She shrieked. My mother is going to be homeless. My brother might go to federal prison. We took you in. We treated you like a son. You treated me like an ATM, Jamal corrected sharply, stepping away from the door and moving closer to the kitchen island. Do not stand in my home and talk to me about family. Let us talk about how your family actually operates. Let us talk about the Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago, when your mother openly mocked my neighborhood growing up, making racist jokes about my background while drinking wine I paid for. Let us talk about Jason constantly dismissing my career, calling me a glorified computer repairman, while he secretly drained his wife's emergency fund to buy a luxury car for his mistress. Olivia opened her mouth to argue, but Jamal raised a hand, silencing her instantly. And let us talk about you, Olivia, he continued, his eyes locking onto hers. You stood by and cheered while your brother tried to throw Natalie out onto the street. You laughed at her. You defended every single toxic and manipulative action your family ever took because it benefited you financially. You only care about my money right now because the brother you relied on is currently facing a felony conviction. But Jamal, I am your wife, she pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. You promised to protect me. Jamal reached onto the kitchen counter and picked up a thick legal envelope. He walked over to where she stood and slid the heavy packet directly into her hands. I promised to protect a partner, not a parasite, Jamal replied coldly. Those are the finalized divorce papers. My lawyer pushed them through the expedited system this morning. I already signed them. You have zero legal claim to my tech stock, my savings, or my future. Olivia stared down at the documents, her hands trembling violently. The reality of her total isolation finally crushed the last remaining shred of her entitlement. She looked up at Jamal, her eyes wide with absolute terror. You need to leave, Jamal commanded, gesturing toward the open doorway. Go back to the suburbs. Go help your mother pack. Olivia stood frozen for a long moment, waiting for a lifeline that was never going to come. When Jamal did not break his icy stare, she finally turned around, clutching the divorce papers to her chest. She walked slowly out into the hallway, completely broken. Jamal did not say goodbye. He grabbed the heavy brass handle and shut the door firmly in her face, locking the deadbolt with a loud, satisfying click. Amber had spent the last 6 months living in a carefully constructed fantasy. When Jason first approached her, he presented himself as a wealthy, powerful executive trapped in a loveless marriage with a cold, uncaring woman. He promised Amber a sprawling suburban estate and a life where she would never have to worry about money again. For a brief, intoxicating month, she actually believed him. She reveled in the expensive baby furniture and the brand-new electric SUV parked in the driveway. But standing in the doorway of the living room, watching the man she thought was a titan of industry, sobbing into his hands on a velvet sofa, The fantasy violently evaporated. She slowly backed away, retreating into the grand foyer. She was young, but she was not completely naive. She recognized the distinct scent of a sinking ship. The police arresting him at the office was bad enough, but the foreclosure notice changed the equation entirely. She had overheard Beatrice screaming about the massive $645,000 debt. Amber knew Jason had just lost his six-figure salary, his executive health insurance, and his corporate reputation. The luxurious life he promised her was nothing more than a stolen illusion funded by my money and sustained by his massive, fragile ego. As she stood in the shadows of the hallway, Jason's personal cell phone rang. He scrambled off the sofa, his hands shaking violently as he answered it. Amber pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath to listen. It was a high-profile criminal defense attorney Jason had frantically called earlier that afternoon. The attorney's voice was loud and clipped, bleeding clearly through the phone speaker. He bluntly informed Jason that defending a Class 3 felony forgery charge required an immense amount of billable hours. He demanded a $25,000 retainer fee payable immediately via wire transfer before taking the case. Amber listened closely as Jason's voice cracked. He begged the attorney for a reasonable payment plan. He desperately tried to leverage the equity of the house, practically crying as he explained that his mother held the deed, but the property was currently tied up in a commercial lien dispute. The attorney coldly interrupted him, stating with absolute finality that his law firm did not accept imaginary real estate equity or payment plans from unemployed felony suspects. The line went dead. Jason threw the phone across the room, shattering the glass screen against the painted brick fireplace. Beatrice immediately marched into the living room, her own crushing panic boiling over into blinding rage. The two of them erupted into a vicious, screaming argument. Beatrice blamed Jason for forging the legal document and ruining her retirement. Jason screamed right back, blaming Beatrice for constantly pressuring him to take the house to prove his masculinity. Their toxic echo chamber completely collapsed as they viciously turned on each other like cornered animals. Their shouting echoed loudly through the high ceilings of the first floor, providing the perfect acoustic cover for Amber to make her final move. She did not hesitate. Amber turned around and silently hurried up the grand wooden staircase to the master bedroom. She pulled her expensive designer travel bags from the custom walk-in closet. She rapidly filled them with her designer clothes, her expensive cosmetics, and every single piece of fine jewelry Jason had gifted her over the past year. She was not going to stick around to be collateral damage in a severe federal fraud investigation. She was not going to raise her child in a cramped, miserable apartment with a convicted felon who could not even afford a lawyer. Before zipping her final leather bag, she noticed Jason's laptop sitting wide open on the mahogany nightstand. He had left his personal banking portal logged in from his frantic morning attempts to secure a personal loan. Amber sat on the edge of the bed and looked closely at the checking account balance. There was exactly $4,200 left to his name. With a few practiced keystrokes, she wired the entire remaining balance directly into her own private account. She closed the laptop, grabbed the heavy bags, and snatched the key fob to the electric SUV. She slipped quietly down the back staircase, going completely unnoticed over the sound of Jason and Beatrice screaming obscenities at each other. Amber loaded her bags into the trunk of the electric SUV, climbed into the comfortable driver's seat, and pressed the silent ignition button. As she reversed smoothly out of the long stone driveway, she pulled out her phone, opened Jason's contact profile, and hit block. She drove away into the cool evening air, leaving him completely trapped in the terrifying financial nightmare he had built with his own two hands. The aftermath of Amber fleeing with the last of Jason's cash left him completely paralyzed. For the next 3 weeks leading up to the foreclosure hearing, the sprawling suburban house transformed from a stolen prize into a suffocating prison. Without electricity, which was shut off after Jason failed to pay the overdue utility bills he had previously demanded, I Cover the House grew freezing cold as the Chicago autumn set in. Jason and Beatrice lived out of boxes, eating canned food, jumping at every shadow and waiting for the inevitable hammer to fall. The morning of the hearing arrived with a bitter, biting wind. The towering downtown courthouse loomed over them like a concrete fortress. Jason and Beatrice sat on the hard wooden benches of the courtroom gallery, looking utterly unrecognizable from the arrogant people who had paraded around my backyard just months prior. Jason wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit he had dug out of a closet, his face unshaven and his eyes hollow from severe sleep deprivation. The stress of his pending felony case and his total financial ruin had aged him a decade. Beside him, Beatrice looked frail and terrified. Her expensive silk robes were gone, replaced by a rumpled wool coat. She clutched her purse with trembling hands, staring blankly at the polished mahogany floor. I entered the courtroom 10 minutes before the docket was called, flanked by David and two other senior partners from my corporate legal team. I wore a pristine charcoal gray suit, my heels clicking sharply against the floor with absolute authority. I did not look at Jason or Beatrice. I took my seat at the plaintiff table, calmly arranging my meticulously organized files. Across the aisle, Jason sat alone at the defense table. Because Amber had stolen his remaining $4,000, and he could not afford the $25,000 retainer for a private criminal attorney, he certainly could not afford a civil litigator to fight a commercial foreclosure. He was attempting to represent himself against a team of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in the city. The bailiff announced the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Kessler, known for her absolute intolerance of white-collar fraud. She took her seat at the high bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and looked down at the massive stack of evidence my team had submitted. When Jason was called to present his defense, his previous bravado was entirely gone. He stood up on shaking legs and stammered through a pathetic, disjointed narrative. He tried to claim the Vanguard Holdings contract was predatory. He attempted to argue that he had a verbal agreement giving him equity in the house. He even tried to play the victim, whining to the judge that I was a vindictive ex-wife trying to leave his elderly mother homeless over a simple paperwork error. Judge Kessler did not even look up from her files. Are you referring to the paperwork error where you actively committed a Class 3 felony by forging the plaintiff's signature on a county-recorded quitclaim deed? She asked, her voice dripping with absolute disdain. Because the criminal indictment filed against you last week strongly suggests this was not an error but a calculated theft. Jason opened his mouth but no sound came out. My lead attorney, David, stood up and delivered the final clinical blow. He did not raise his voice. He simply stated the undeniable facts. He outlined the original seller financing agreement, the clear violation of the due on sale clause, and the massive defaulted balance of $645,000. He pointed out that Beatrice, the current legal owner of the property due to Jason's fraudulent transfer, had completely failed to produce the required funds within the 30-day notice period. The breach of contract was absolute and indisputable. Judge Kessler had heard enough. She looked down at Jason with zero sympathy. You attempted to use the legal system to steal $1 million asset and leave your wife on the street, she stated firmly, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. Instead, you have defrauded your own mother and triggered a massive commercial default. You have absolutely no legal standing, no equity, and no defense. She picked up her heavy wooden gavel. I am granting summary judgment in favor of Vanguard Holdings, LLC. Judge Kessler announced. The property is to be immediately repossessed. The current occupants are ordered to vacate the premises. If the property is not entirely empty by 8 o'clock in the morning on the fourth Thursday of November, the county sheriff is authorized to execute a forcible eviction. The gavel slammed down with a sharp, echoing crack. It was the sound of absolute finality. Jason collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands as a loud, mournful sob escaped Beatrice's throat from the gallery. I gathered my files, stood up, and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance. The eviction date the judge had just set was no coincidence. The fourth Thursday of November was Thanksgiving Day. They had tried to throw me out on the 4th of July, and now I was going to take my house back on a holiday of my own. The fourth Thursday of November arrived with a bitter, biting chill that swept across the Chicago suburbs. Thick, heavy clouds blanketed the sky, dropping a steady layer of fresh white snow over the manicured lawns and quiet streets. It was Thanksgiving Day. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and roasting turkeys as families gathered in the warmth of their homes to celebrate. The setting was a stark poetic parallel to the sweltering 4th of July barbecue where this entire nightmare began. Back then, Jason had proudly stood in the summer heat surrounded by an audience of impressed neighbors attempting to publicly humiliate me and strip me of my home. Now the seasons had turned, the heat was gone, and the icy reality of his actions was finally coming to collect. Inside the sprawling brick estate, the temperature was barely above freezing. Jason and Beatrice had spent the last 3 weeks living in absolute denial, refusing to pack their belongings. They huddled in the dark, shivering in their winter coats, surrounded by the ghosts of a luxury lifestyle they never actually owned. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the heavy rumble of diesel engines shattered the peaceful holiday silence. Two large black and white county sheriff vehicles turned onto the street, their tires crunching loudly against the packed snow. Right behind them was a massive commercial moving box truck. The convoy pulled directly into the long stone driveway of the estate. The flashing yellow and blue lights of the police cruisers reflected off the fresh snow, immediately drawing the attention of the entire street. Two uniformed sheriff deputies stepped out of their vehicles. They walked with brisk, uncompromising purpose up the stone pathway, their heavy black boots leaving deep footprints in the snow. One of the deputies pounded heavily on the front door. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the freezing, empty foyer. When Jason finally opened the door, he looked like a ghost. He was pale, trembling, and entirely defeated. The deputy did not offer a holiday greeting. He held up a clipboard displaying the court-ordered writ of possession. "The deadline has expired," the deputy announced, his voice carrying clearly through the crisp winter air. "By order of the county court, you are required to vacate these premises immediately. Step outside." Jason did not argue. He had no fight left in him. He stepped out onto the freezing porch, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. Beatrice followed closely behind him, clutching a small overnight bag, her face stained with tears. She looked out at the street, her eyes widening in absolute horror, as the back of the moving truck rolled open. A crew of 6 burly movers in heavy jackets marched past them, entering the house without a single word of apology or hesitation. The forced eviction was swift, clinical, and completely merciless. The moving crew began dragging every piece of personal property out of the house and dumping it directly onto the snow-covered front lawn. Out came the expensive velvet sofa where Jason had sobbed over his criminal defense fees. Out came Beatrice's prized antique dining chairs, their delicate wooden legs sinking into the wet slush. The movers hauled out boxes of cheap junk, Jason's remaining rumpled suits, and the ridiculous imported baby furniture Amber had left behind. The manicured lawn quickly transformed into a chaotic, tragic graveyard of their own greed. Expensive fabrics soaked up the freezing moisture. Cardboard boxes collapsed under the weight of the falling snow, spilling their contents across the grass. The commotion was impossible to ignore. Front doors across the neighborhood began to open. Neighbors stepped out onto their covered porches, pulling their thick robes tighter against the cold. They stood holding warm mugs of coffee, watching the spectacular downfall unfold in real time. Brenda, the Homeowners Association president, who had brutally rejected Beatrice's plea for a loan, stood on her porch with a look of supreme satisfaction. Jason noticed the audience gathering. The very same people he had desperately wanted to impress, the people he had invited to his lavish brunches to boast about his real estate genius, were now watching him being physically thrown out of his house by armed law enforcement. He ducked his head, his face burning with a level of humiliation so deep it was almost physical. Beatrice covered her face with her gloved hands, sobbing uncontrollably as her favorite antique vanity mirror was unceremoniously dropped into a snowbank. They had wanted an audience to witness their ultimate triumph. Now they had an audience to witness their absolute destruction. They stood on the edge of the snowy sidewalk, surrounded by the freezing ruins of their stolen life, completely homeless on a holiday centered around family and gratitude. And the poetic justice of the morning was about to reach its absolute peak. As the heavy wooden doors of the estate swung open again and again, the pile of discarded belongings on the front lawn grew into a massive snow-covered mountain of failure. The movers operated with ruthless efficiency, completely ignoring the weeping woman and the broken man standing on the sidewalk. The biting wind whipped across the yard, carrying the bitter chill of a Chicago winter, freezing the tears directly onto Beatrice's cheeks. The gathered neighbors remained firmly planted on their porches, wrapping their thick coats tighter, absolutely captivated by the dramatic conclusion of the neighborhood scandal. Then a low, powerful purr of a high-performance engine cut through the ambient noise of the diesel-moving truck. Gliding smoothly down the snow-packed street was a brand-new jet-black Porsche Panamera. The sleek aerodynamic curves of the luxury vehicle stood in stark contrast to the dreary, freezing morning. Its dark-tinted windows reflected the flashing blue and yellow lights of the sheriff cruisers. The heavy tires crunched softly against the fresh snow as the vehicle turned seamlessly into the edge of the driveway, coming to a gentle halt just inches away from Beatrice's ruined antique vanity mirror. For a long moment, the heavy car just sat there, the engine idling with a deep, intimidating rumble radiating heat into the freezing air. The neighborhood watched this spectacular display of justice. Brenda, the Homeowners Association president, who had brutally rejected Beatrice just weeks prior, stood on her expansive covered porch with her arms crossed, a look of supreme satisfaction firmly planted on her face. Other neighbors leaned against mailboxes holding warm mugs, whispering among themselves as the massive wooden dining table where Beatrice had hosted so many arrogant brunch parties was carelessly dragged across the snow. The pristine suburban bubble they fought to control was entirely shattered. The illusion of their wealth was laid bare for everyone to see, reduced to a pathetic pile of damp furniture and broken pride on a freezing morning. The heavy driver's side door clicked open. I stepped out onto the pristine white snow. I was not wearing the casual summer clothes they last saw me in on that sweltering patio. I wore a stunning, impeccably tailored camel cashmere winter coat that fell perfectly to my knees, paired with black leather gloves and designer boots. In my right hand, I held a steaming cup of artisan latte. The rich aroma of roasted espresso drifted through the crisp air, a sharp, warm contrast to the bitter cold surrounding my former family. I closed the heavy car door with a solid, satisfying thud and walked slowly toward the edge of the property line. I did not shout. I did not hurl insults. I did not wave a piece of paper in their faces to gloat about my victory. I simply stood on the sidewalk, took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee, and watched the moving crew do their job. Silence has always been the most devastating weapon in any negotiation, and in this moment, my silence was absolutely deafening. I watched as two large men struggled to carry the massive stainless steel double-door refrigerator out the front door. It was the exact same refrigerator Beatrice had so arrogantly claimed belonged to her on the 4th of July. They hauled it down the steps and left it sitting awkwardly in the middle of the snowy driveway. Jason stood less than 10 feet away from me. He was shivering violently, his thin, cheap suit jacket offering absolutely no protection against the freezing winter wind. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched forward in a posture of complete and utter defeat. He knew I was standing right there. He could feel my presence, but he was far too ashamed to even lift his head. He stared fixedly at the toes of his ruined leather shoes, watching the snow melt into the cheap fabric. His mind was surely playing a cruel montage of his own arrogance. He remembered puffing out his chest and telling me to go back to a cramped apartment. He remembered laughing with his pregnant mistress, believing he had stolen a $1 million asset. Now he was the one standing on the street with absolutely nothing to his name. The sheer psychological weight of the moment crushed whatever tiny fraction of pride Jason had left. He could not make eye contact with the woman whose career he had mocked, whose money he had drained, and whose signature he had forged. He was a convicted felon awaiting trial, a terminated executive, and a homeless man, all because he tried to play a high-stakes financial game he fundamentally did not understand. Beatrice, however, could not look away. She stared at me through her tear-swollen eyes, her face pale and trembling. She looked at my pristine cashmere coat, my brand-new luxury car, and my calm, unbothered expression. The absolute finality of her situation crashed down upon her. She was watching the woman she had treated like garbage effortlessly reclaim the castle. She realized that while they were busy playing pretend in a house they stole, I had been quietly orchestrating their total destruction from a luxury penthouse. I took another slow sip of my latte, letting the warm vanilla flavor wash over my tongue, thoroughly enjoying the spectacular view of justice being served cold. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the heavy thud of the moving crew dropping boxes onto the snow. The absolute reality of the moment finally crushed the last remaining walls of Beatrice's manufactured dignity. She could not take it anymore. She let out a high-pitched, desperate wail that echoed down the entire freezing street. Abandoning every ounce of her pride, she stumbled forward, her boots slipping on the icy pavement, and practically ran across the slushy driveway toward me. Jason flinched at the sound of his mother crying out, but he did absolutely nothing to stop her. He remained firmly rooted to his spot by the street, a pathetic coward, watching his elderly mother debase herself because he was too weak and ashamed to face the consequences of his own actions. Beatrice closed the distance between us and completely collapsed. She quite literally dropped to her knees right there on the snow-covered sidewalk, stopping just inches from the polished tires of my car. The wet, freezing slush instantly soaked through her wool coat and her expensive trousers, but she did not even seem to notice the bitter cold. She reached out with trembling gloved hands, clumsily grabbing the hem of my cashmere coat as if I were her only lifeline. "Please, Natalie," she sobbed, her voice breaking into a hysterical, unrecognizable screech. "Please, I am begging you. We have absolutely nowhere to go. I have zero money left in my accounts. My friends will not even answer my phone calls. We cannot survive out here." I looked down at the woman kneeling in the freezing slush. This was the exact same woman who had spent 5 years treating me like a second-class citizen. This was the woman who had stood on my sunny patio just months ago, vibrating with malicious joy as she ordered me to pack my cheap bags and get out of her new house. I did not take a step back, but I did pull the fabric of my coat smoothly out of her desperate grasp. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. There was no pity, no anger, and no lingering resentment. There was only the cold, sterile satisfaction of a perfectly executed corporate restructuring. I had successfully cut the toxic liabilities from my life, and I was looking at the discarded remains. "You have an enormous house with 5 bedrooms." Beatrice choked out, tears streaming down her wrinkled face and freezing almost instantly in the biting wind. "Just let us stay in the basement. We will not make a sound. We will not bother you. Jason can do the yard work. Just please do not leave us on the street. It is Thanksgiving. You cannot do this to your family on a holiday." I took a slow, deliberate breath of the crisp winter air. The sheer audacity to invoke the word family after everything they had done to me was truly astounding. They only remembered we were family when they needed someone to bleed dry. "You are not my family, Beatrice," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and laced with absolute ice. "My family consists of people who respect me. You and your son are simply trespassers who forged a legal document to steal my property. You played a vicious game and you lost everything. Actions have consequences, and today is your collection day." Beatrice let out another agonizing sob, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently against the winter wind. Behind her, the movers were currently wrestling the massive stainless steel refrigerator onto the mechanical liftgate of the moving truck. The heavy metal clanked loudly over the sound of her crying. I looked from the weeping woman at my feet to the massive appliance being loaded away. A brief, genuine smile finally touched my lips as the perfect poetic symmetry of the moment locked into place. "You can't stay," I stated, ensuring my voice was loud and clear enough for Jason to hear from where he stood shivering in the driveway. "My security team has been instructed to call the police the second you step foot on my property line." Beatrice looked up, a pathetic glimmer of false hope flashing in her tear-swollen eyes, waiting for a compromise that would never arrive. "But feel free to take the refrigerator," I said, delivering the final crushing blow with a polite, unaffected tone. "I'm having the kitchen completely gutted tomorrow anyway." The false hope in Beatrice's eyes instantly died, replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of total devastation. She slumped forward into the snow, completely broken. I did not wait for Jason to say a single word. and I did not give the gawking neighbors another second of my time. I turned my back on the wreckage of their lives. I walked smoothly up the freshly shoveled pathway, my boots clicking firmly against the stone. I climbed the steps to my front porch, unlocked the heavy wooden door, and stepped inside my warm, quiet house. I shut the door firmly behind me, the heavy deadbolt sliding into place with a loud absolute click. 6 months passed. The bitter, freezing Chicago winter eventually thawed, giving way to a brilliant and warm spring. I sat on the terrace of an exclusive high-end rooftop restaurant right in the heart of downtown, the evening city lights sparkling like a sea of diamonds against the twilight sky. The air was filled with the soft hum of jazz music and the quiet murmur of successful people enjoying their lives. Across the mahogany table from me sat Jamal. He looked incredibly healthy, sharp, and completely unburdened by the toxic weight of his former marriage. We raised our crystal champagne flutes, the delicate chime of the glass ringing out, as a celebration of pure survival and total victory. I had just been officially promoted to senior partner at my consulting firm, a position that came with a massive corner office and a highly lucrative equity stake. Jamal was celebrating a massive milestone of his own. The software startup he had poured his brilliant mind into had just secured its Series A funding from a major venture capital firm. We drank to new beginnings, to severed ties, and to the profound peace that comes from permanently removing parasites from your life. We did not talk about my former house, which I had successfully gutted, renovated, and sold for a massive profit. We did not talk about Olivia, who was currently drowning in her own financial ruin after Jamal finalized their divorce and completely cut off her access to his wealth. We simply enjoyed the beautiful evening, savoring the absolute freedom we had both fought so hard to secure. Miles away from that luxurious rooftop terrace, the stark reality of those severed ties was playing out under harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. Jason was standing behind the sticky-stained counter of a 24-hour gas station on the desolate edge of the city limits. He wore a cheap, oversized polyester uniform shirt that clung uncomfortably to his frame, a name tag pinned crookedly to his chest. His designer suits were completely gone, seized, and sold off to pay a fraction of his mounting legal debts. But his most defining accessory was not a gold watch or a silk tie. It was the bulky black GPS ankle monitor strapped tightly around his left leg, hidden beneath his baggy khaki pants. He had narrowly avoided a lengthy federal prison sentence by pleading guilty to the felony forgery charge, but the judge had shown absolutely no mercy with his strict probation terms. He was a convicted felon, permanently stripped of his corporate career, his pristine credit score, and his dignity. A customer walked into the gas station wearing a sharp, tailored business suit, talking loudly on his cell phone about a major corporate merger. Jason watched him with hollow, bloodshot eyes, ringing up the man's cheap energy drink and stale snacks. Jason was forced to smile and bite his tongue while the wealthy customer treated him like he was completely invisible. Every single beep of the cash register was a brutal, agonizing reminder of the million-dollar life he had carelessly thrown away, simply because his fragile ego could not handle a successful wife. Not far from Jason's gas station, Beatrice was experiencing her own terrifying personal hell. She sat in a worn-out, badly stained armchair inside a cramped, deeply depressing Section 8 apartment. The walls were paper-thin, the paint was peeling in large strips, and the persistent, nauseating smell of cheap bleach and old cooking grease hung heavy in the stale air. She could hear her neighbors shouting through the ceiling, a stark contrast to the peaceful, manicured silence of the suburban estate she briefly claimed as her own. She spent her lonely days staring blankly out of a dirty, smudged window that offered a bleak view of a cracked asphalt parking lot littered with trash. There were no lavish Sunday brunches anymore. There were no imported cheeses, no crystal champagne flutes, and no admiring guests. Her phone never rang because every single wealthy friend from her precious homeowners association had permanently blocked her number the day she was evicted. She was entirely isolated, trapped in a tiny, miserable box, left with absolutely nothing but the suffocating memory of her own blinding arrogance. She had trusted her golden child to elevate her status, and he had dragged her straight to the absolute bottom. Back on the rooftop, I finished the last sip of my champagne, feeling the warm, pleasant breeze brush past my face. Looking down at the sprawling, vibrant city below, I felt a profound sense of closure. When people confuse your silence for weakness, they often make the fatal mistake of underestimating your intelligence. They assume your patience is a lack of power. My former family thought I was just a cold machine they could easily manipulate and discard. They thought they could forge a signature, take my money, and walk away clean. They thought they could steal my foundation because I was quiet. They didn't realize I owned the ground they were standing on.